finally, exam 4 review. Basically, in this particular unit, we talked about the global warming and the greenhouse effect, and so basically we had to review or learn a little bit of basic chemistry fundamentals. So obviously on the test, I'm going to test you over some of the basic fundamentals, but I'm also going to test you over the issue of global warming. So you need to know both. So first of all, you need to know what the greenhouse effect is. Okay. The greenhouse effect. You need to know, how it works, how the heat is trapped in the atmosphere, and all that kind of stuff. And to that point, you should be familiar with the carbon cycle. The fact that it's the carbon cycling from living to non-living, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, fixed carbon in living things and non-living things, in the oceans, in the soils, and in plants and animals. Then the basic chemistry business, we had to learn VSEPR, or this molecular modeling business, which is this concept that the electrons are going to, on the valence shell of the central atom in any molecule, are going to arrange themselves in space as far apart as possible. There's this repelling business going on, and the repelling electrons is going to dictate the three-dimensional shape of the molecule. And you should know the basics of how to predict shape and bond angles for the basic linear, trigonal planar, tetrahedral, and then trigonal planar could also, when you have trigonal planar electronic geometry, you could also have bent if you have one non-bonding pair of electrons. And in the case of tetrahedral, you can have trigonal pyramidal or bent, depending on if you have one or two non-bonding pairs of electrons. All right, so you have to understand the concept behind VSEPR. You have to remember the names of the basic, what we call electronic geometries, or regions, domains of electron density, and then how those map onto the molecular geometries. Okay. If there's no non-bonding pairs on the central atom, the electronic and the molecular geometries are going to be called the same thing. But if there's some non-bonding pairs of electrons, the electronic geometry will be one of the basic three: linear, trigonal planar, or tetrahedral, but the molecular geometry will be different. It'll be what the molecule looks like. So you need to make sure you practice plenty of that. And then the other basic idea, and we had to understand this so we could understand why infrared radiation is absorbed by some molecules and not absorbed by other molecules. Okay, so you need to understand the example that we really looked at was the carbon dioxide example, the bends, the stretches, and how to look at that IR spectrum and understand what's going on with that. All right, and then okay, and it's absorbed by vibrations in the bonds. Okay, but only if it's asymmetric type of bending or stretching. And so little linear molecules only have what's called 1 degree of freedom, only one stretch, and it's linear. So it can't be in those little nitrogen and oxygen type little linear molecules where both atoms are the same. And then the other thing that as far as basics that you had to learn, or probably just review, and I went over it very, very quickly, but I gave lots of practice. If you can't do molar mass, if you don't know what a mole is or do molar mass, you need to practice some more. Ask your teacher for more practice sheets if you need more practice sheets, but you should be familiar with the mole. You should be able to convert from moles of something to numbers of something. You ought to be able to calculate molar masses, and then from that, the point was to be able to calculate the mass percent of certain elements within compounds. And the reason why we went through all of that is so you could understand in the carbon cycle the difference between, if somebody's reporting the mass of carbon in the atmosphere versus the mass of carbon dioxide, how can you go back and forth between the two, convert between total mass of carbon dioxide or mass of carbon? Well, as long as you understand the concept that the mass ratio is conserved in pure substances, then the mass ratio is the mass ratio, and you can approach it based on mass percent or just simply purely mass ratio. It works out either way. All right, and then so that's all. I mean, that sort of goes over all the basics that we covered this unit. Then the issue. You should also be familiar with the issues of global warming. You should try to understand this concept of modeling and why it's difficult to model when you have so many variables. No, I wouldn't say difficult. Difficult to model when you have so many variables. And also, you need to understand why it's hard for countries to agree on anything when it comes down to affecting economies and whatnot. Countries to agree, that's also difficult. Assessing the risk is also difficult because the models are so difficult. Then you should be familiar with some solutions, such as carbon sequestration or better, more fuel-efficient types of industries. Okay, so be familiar with some solutions and why this whole business is so controversial, and what are some of the bad consequences of global warming. Okay, if the models work out, and then the worst case scenario, what could be some of the bad consequences? Okay, so all of this is the issues, and so the reason why we want you to understand a little bit about the chemistry is so you yourself, if you understand, why it's important to purchase an efficient refrigerator. It might cost a little bit more money, but in the long run, it's going to save you energy and it's going to be better for the environment. Why should you purchase a more fuel-efficient car? Why should you, walk more and drive less? All these things, if each individual understood, the basics behind it, you can understand how you yourself can make decisions that in the long run are better for you and for the world around you. So that's the gist of this unit. You need to be familiar with the basics and then also with the issues. And then if you study hard and do all your homework and go over your quizzes again, you ought to do just fine on the test.